Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name's Councillor Robert Parker and I'm the Chairman of the Board. Welcome to all members and officers in attendance today. The audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website. I would also like to welcome the members of the press and public who may be listening or are listening to our meeting today. Anyone invited to speak during today's meeting should unmute their microphone and switch on their camera. Please turn off your camera and microphone when not participating. We will today be conducting a roll call voting for the minutes and the pre-decision scrutiny item, which are agenda items 3 and 8 on the agenda. The rest will be agreed by dissent using the chat function. If you want to speak, please use the chat function and type speak as a comment. All officers and members are very welcome to use the chat function, and requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman, Councillor Ray Wotton. Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services and Statutory Scrutiny Officer, will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun. If by any chance you experience any IT issues during the meeting, please end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided. If you experience connectivity issues while speaking, please turn your camera off, as this might help. If you continue to experience IT issues, please contact Simon Firth, IT engineer, for assistance. Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting or are returning to the meeting indicate using the chat functions. Officers don't need to do so. Okay. Can I now move to the order of proceedings? And can I begin by asking Nick Harrison, Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members in attendance at the meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Adams.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Brockway.
Present.
Councillor Kendrick.
Present.
Councillor Kendrick.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Macy.
Present.
Councillor Marfleet.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Newton.
Present.
Councillor Pepper.
Present.
Councillor Strangle.
Present.
Councillor Oxby.
I've gone wrong. Present.
Thank you. And then we have the added members. Mrs Machin. Miss Sayer. Sorry, was that you, Mrs Machin?
Hello, yes, the present, sorry.
Thank you. Miss Sayer. Reverend Philip Johnson. And then have we got Councillor Corey? I thought I'd seen her in the attendance, Councillor Corey. Councillor Linda Wotton.
Yep, sorry, I couldn't get my mic to work. Yeah, I'm just listening in. Thank you. I'll keep quiet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Linda Wotton.
I am present. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other people who I haven't mentioned attending?
Yeah, Councillor Hill, present.
Thank you. That's all. Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nick, and welcome to everybody. Can we move then to the agenda? Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Nick, do we have any apologies?
Yes, we've got Councillor Mrs Boquet and Councillor Oxby is deputising, and we've got an apology from Executive Councillor Young.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interest. As everybody, members know, if any member wants to declare an interest, can you please indicate in the chat now by typing speak when it comes to declarations of councillors' interests? I take it from that nobody's got an interest. Thank you.
Not indicated, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the meeting of our last Overview and Scrutiny Management Board meeting held on the 26th of November 2020. The reason this item is on the agenda is to confirm and sign the minutes from the meeting of the board as a correct record. First of all, do I have a proposer and seconder?
Chairman, happy to propose.
Okay,
Happy to second, Chairman.
thank you. Can we just quickly take a moment to look at pages in relation to this, just so that anybody wants to indicate anything to the contrary. Start off with page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, 13 and 14. So we've had the opportunity to comment if we wanted to. Okay, so we've got a proposer and seconder. We'll now vote on the minutes. As a quick reminder, you're voting on whether you agree the minutes are a correct record. Nick will call out the name of each member present in alphabetical order, and you're asked to say for, against or abstain. Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Adams. For. Councillor Mrs Brockway.
For.
Councillor Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Macy.
For.
Councillor Marfleet.
For.
Councillor Mrs Newton.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
For.
Councillor Strangle.
For.
Councillor Ray Wootton.
For.
Councillor Oxby.
Against. Oh, sorry, abstain, as I wasn't present.
Thank you. Reverend Philip Johnson. I think he's here. Mrs Machin.
For.
Thank you. Ms Sayer. I don't think she's present. That's unanimous, Chairman, of those present.
That's good. Fine. Move to item 4. Here's where we deal with announcements by myself as chair, executive councillors and chief officers. Could I begin? After the last meeting, I attended the meeting of the executive on the 1st of December and presented the comments from the board on the revenue and capital budget monitoring reports for quarter 2. Further to our comments on the capital budget monitoring report, it was suggested at the executive that consideration should be given to the member oversight of capital schemes and the lessons learned to complement the progress being made by officers, which includes the work of the Officers-led Capital Review Group. I mentioned at the November meeting that an alternative date for the March meeting was being looked at in order to enable the board to conduct its usual business before the pre-election purdah period, which is expected to start on the 22nd of March. I can now confirm that our March meeting will be held on Wednesday, the 17th of March, and the revised appointment has been sent out to members and officers. That's the end of my announcements. If we turn to Executive Councillor announcements, if any, could I start with Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of the Council? Any Executive Councillor announcements
Thanks,
to make?
Chairman. Sorry,
No, carry on. Sorry, it's your turn.
not at this stage. Sorry,
That's fine.
Beg your pardon. Nothing to say at the moment. Obviously waiting for the announcement on the tiers imminently. That's my only announcement, Chairman.
Thank you, and I'm sure that you'll pass on what you're able to and share it with us. That's really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think Councillor Barry Young, who is the Executive Councillor for Community Safety and People Management, is here, but is Councillor Bootroyd able to say anything in his absence? No. Okay. Moving on, Chief Officer announcements, starting with the Chief Executive, Debbie Barnes.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Just really to build on the leader's comment about the date, the statement about the tiers, just to confirm that we understand that there will be an announcement in the House at 11:30 this morning, and obviously then 2 weekly reviews of the tier thereafter.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Debbie. Chief Officer announcements, maybe from James Drury, Executive Director Commercial. James.
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing from me this morning, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5, consideration of call-ins. Nick, has there been any call-ins for us to consider?
There's none received, Chairman.
Thank you. Next item is consideration of councillor calls for action. Nick, have we had any councillor calls for action?
Unreceived, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so we may move to what we might call the substantive items on the agenda, which starts off with item 7, the scrutiny review report to be presented by on developer contributions to be brought to us by Councillor Linda Wootton. This item sets out a draft final report on developer contributions. I'd like to welcome Councillor Linda Wootton, Chair of Scrutiny Panel A, who's going to present this report. She'll be ably supported, I'm sure, by Justin Brown, Assistant Director Growth, and Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer. Okay, Councillor Wootton, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I am pleased to present to you today the draft final report from Scrutiny Panel A on developer contributions. The review started in October after we were asked to undertake a short, urgent review by Councillor Colin Davey and group leaders on developer contributions. The panel met 3 times over October and November and considered the proposals in the government's planning for the future paper, what developer contributions are and how the process for requesting them works in Lincolnshire, how councillors are involved in the process and how we can maximise the benefits from developer contributions for our local communities. The panel identified that there was a need for councillor training on developer contributions and more engagement by councillors in the planning process. A centralised system needs to be developed to request, record and monitor developer contributions across the council, which should then improve the Section 106 income received and a need for appropriate lines of accountability and strategic. The panel recognised that a more joined up approach with the district councils would enable more collaborative working to maximise the benefits to local communities. This will become crucial if the white paper proposals for developer contributions are introduced, as Lincolnshire could receive much lower levels of funding in the future. The 6 recommendations contained in the report aim to address the issues identified. In sum, to maximise the benefits from developer contributions, there are 4 key points that need to be addressed by the County Council. These are: what does the Council want developer contributions for? Does the Council receive enough income to mitigate the impacts of development? 3, how does the Council decide what schemes go ahead when there is not enough income? And 4, does the Council manage the income it receives effectively? These 4 points can be addressed by the Council through leadership, decision making and management. Leadership will be achieved through recommendations 1, 2 and 5. Decision making will be achieved through recommendation 4. Management will be achieved through recommendations 3 and 6. Subject to the board's approval today, I will present the final report and 6 recommendations to the executive for its consideration on the 5th of January 2021. I am now going to hand over to Justin Brown to add his comments, but before I do that, Chairman, if you can just bear with me, I would like to personally thank Tracy Johnson, the Senior Scrutiny Officer, the Democratic team, the management team and officers, along with the members of the Scrutiny Panel A, for their work on this review. I do hope this paper addresses what Executive Councillor Colin Davey was looking for, and I do hope in the future it will be acceptable to the Executive Board. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So over to Justin.
Thank you, Councillor Parker, and thank you, Councillor Wootton. We've seen over the last 24 hours that the government are starting to change aspects of the planning white paper. And therefore, some of the recommendations that were made by the scrutiny panel are extremely helpful, because they will help us to be able to respond and hopefully at times comment on the changes that government are proposing. We are currently starting to think about a very rapidly implemented action plan as a group of officers taking forward the recommendations. Clearly, we're starting the thinking process and await the outcome of Councillor Wotton's discussion with the executive in January before doing that. But I would say that where we think it's particularly important to reflect what the scrutiny panel said is around giving clarity both to the local planning authority and to the developer businesses about what the council believes are the right things to mitigate against development. That we strengthen the accountability, as Councillor Wotton said, so that there is clarity over who ultimately takes decisions, and that there is a clear and visible ability to manage the finance, and that we are able to put something into place which enables local divisional members to give us that really important local context of what a development might mean in their area. So we look forward to taking forward an action plan subject to the comments today and subject to the comments that the executive make in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Fine. Okay, so we now move to debate. Just a reminder, we're being asked to consider approving the draft final report, which has just been presented by Councillor Wotton, and also to make contributions, which Councillor Wotton may or may not take forward, but I think she will. So have we got any indication of who wants to speak?
None at this time, Chairman.
Okay, I'm sure that that there will be, but could I ask a couple of questions to kick us off? Recommendation 1 of the report essentially is about noting that we oppose some of the things that that the government is planning at the moment. So I just wonder how that opposition has manifested itself, and whether or not we feel as though, I mean, recommendation 1 continues to oppose those aspects of the planning for the future white paper. Firstly, it's a two-part question. One is, what are we doing about that in opposition? And that's not meant to be conflictual, but what are we doing to bring to the attention of the government in relation to the white paper, our opposition? And secondly, one of the things that stands out is that we have 7 districts, 3 of which are involved in SILs and 4 of which are involved in Section 106. Do we have a combined Lincolnshire approach, which brings the 4 and the 3 together with us to make 8 in any opposition where there is mutual agreement between all 8 of the councils? That's relating to recommendation 1.
Do you want me to comment on that, Councillor Wotton?
Yes, if you'd like to comment for me, please, Justin, to start.
By all means. The government has had a consultation on its planning objectives, and Councillor Davey, on behalf of the council, wrote to the Secretary of State with comments. There was also a discussion amongst the group of local authorities across the county, and the intention of providing a combined response through that route. There is clearly going to be further comments and iterations coming from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and it's proposed that we would continue to respond, accepting those things as positive changes, and also commenting and suggesting differences on any changes that are less than positive. I think we have to be realistic. The government received something north of 5,000 responses to its current proposals. So there is a large swell of opinion around the issue, but we will continue to make representations.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I have two speakers.
Excellent. Excellent. Who's the first one? Councillor
Kendrick, and then followed by Councillor.
Councillor Kendrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think probably many members of this board are currently or have sat on planning committees on their local authorities district level. And it strikes me that the whole premise of the proposals were that there wasn't enough sort of planning applications approved. And I think we all know that many applications have been approved, but it's a question of whether the developers actually put them into action. And I understand that one of the reasons, for example, in areas such as Lincolnshire, is that the return on building a house in Lincolnshire is lower than if you were building it in somewhere, say, Peterborough or Hertfordshire, hence the reluctance to develop some of the approvals. I've looked at the report and I think it's an excellent response, and I too would like to commend all the work that's gone on in putting it together, and I do hope we have a very robust response, to use the phrase, to government on I think it's in a way it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut that they were proposing, and I do hope that everyone gets behind this proposal, and as it says in the recommendation one, oppose those aspects which we don't think are helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, sorry, I missed who the second speaker was.
Yeah, I've got two more now, Chairman. Councillor B and Councillor Bob Adams.
Sorry, I missed that again. There was a bleep. I've got Councillor Bob Adams as third. Who was second?
Councillor Ron Oxby.
Ron Oxby, fine, thank you. Councillor Oxby.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is quite new to me. I didn't know this was going on, but I'm referring you to page 26. There are 5 bullet points there. Bullet point 3 is obviously alarmed because if everybody's got it. What has happened in the past, as a former North Kesteven councillor, obviously on the planning committee, we had issues. I think a lot of people are familiar with the old St John's site, where development was agreed and 106 agreements were put in place. And the developers sort of said, hang on a minute, I haven't got any money to implement this at the moment. Can I build some houses, please? And then I can pay you. Well, this happened. A series of houses were built. The developer then decided to quit the site and declared himself out. So we missed out on 1 of the 6 months. I think the second developer came along, did exactly the same. Well, hang on, we haven't got any money to forward. And they did exactly the same, built a handful of houses, and again, left the site. So I'm just wondering if that is a little bit of an item we should look at first, bearing in mind that this has happened twice to North Kesteven, and I don't know if it's happened to any other district councils in the area, but it's just a thought that sprung to mind, Chairman. Just wonder what your views were.
Thank you. Councillor Wharton, Justin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to go back to Councillor Kendrick's question, first of all, and then I'll address Councillor Oxby's. Councillor Kendrick rightly said there are lots of applications out there for planning for housing, and a lot of them, it doesn't happen. So there is a lot of land banking. And also, our planning departments will be changing the way they think if a lot of these things on the white paper are actually accepted, because the consensus will be actually planning in principle, and in some ways it will take away the local democracy on planning as we know it at the moment. And addressing Councillor Oxby's question, we've had instances like that in Grantham as well. But again, relating to the white paper, with the community infrastructure levy, things will change totally regarding payments, because we might well have 106 monies in the bank at the moment. But my understanding is if the decision is made on the white paper, we won't actually get payments until those developments at least start or are actually built. And I'm sure Justin would perhaps like to answer on that. He knows possibly a little bit more than what I do. But I hope that addresses those two members' questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Justin.
Yeah, thank you. I guess from a Whitehall perspective, you would look upon the issue and you would have been told that there are significant delays to building because of the planning process. So we've already discussed and said we're not convinced that is the case. And you would then look and you would say one of the ways of overcoming viability problems is through cash flow management. And how do you take the cash flow management away from the developer? Well, you encourage the local authority to do it. So that might be the policy that is coming through from the white paper. We know, don't we, that in terms of the starting point, that's false. But we also know that as local authorities, whilst we are significantly large organisations, we have a lot of commitments on our budgets, and the expectation we can simply walk in and cash flow major developments is unfair. I think one of the things that we do need to do, though, is to ensure that we are aware of the implications and the cash flow implications of any of these developments. And that is why in recommendation 3, the scrutiny panel talked about a strategic approach, not just to requesting and coordinating the developments, but specifically to monitoring them as well. Because by taking that approach, we can enter some of these discussions with our eyes open and ensure that we are getting best value without there being a substantial cash flow risk to the council.
Thank you for that, Justin. Councillor Raworth, who's next on the list?
We've got Councillor Bob Adams, Councillor Jackie Brockaway and Councillor Hugo Marfleet.
Yeah, got those? Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I first of all congratulate Linda Wotton and her team for tackling what is a very complex and a pretty difficult piece of legislation to do where this is concerned, Chairman. So I take my hat off to them and to Justin for also tackling it. It is not easy, and it's not easy because of the different ways that planning authorities approach this. And in Lincolnshire, we've got the CIL element and we've got the 106 element. We have got, like Councillor Oxby, I sit on the planning committee at SKDC, and yes, we have these agreements, and later on the developer comes along and says can't afford them because of X, Y, Z reasons, and all sorts of machinations start taking place. To me, Chairman, the key to this from a county point of view is for the planning authorities within the county to agree a template going forward so that we are all, if you like, singing off the same hymn sheet or coming from the same direction. And then the other element of this is monitoring the funds that should be coming in, that are coming in or not coming in. I know I had a bit of a shock in the last few weeks at SK. Some 3 or 4 years ago, we got totally on top of this with a spreadsheet showing all the developments with 106 agreements, because we do 106, not SIL, when they're due and so on. And that process, because of cutbacks, excuse me, with staffing, etc., fell by the wayside. So there's a lot of elements in this that need careful handling and careful management, Chairman. But I think this document is the right way forward. But it needs to be a real collaboration of the different local authorities to ensure that it's fit for purpose and continues to be fit for purpose. These things it's very easy to put something in place and then let it slide for a lot of reasons that are not good reasons, but for reasons of expediency, if that's the right word. So I hope that in starting this, we give it the resources necessary to ensure that all areas of the county get what is needed from these agreements to do infrastructure and so on, Chairman. I'll leave it at that. But again, I do thank the committee for what with a very, very difficult subject.
Thank you. Councillor Wotton, do you want to add anything to what Councillor Adams has just said?
Firstly, I'd like to thank Councillor Adams for his very kind words. I know he is the chairman of our local planning committee. He does a cracking job and forever working, and he's got a lot of understanding of these things. And what he's just said is key. It's about communications. It's about setting up those things to follow this through. It's having a plan. It's about the county talking to the district councils as well. And this is a piece of research that we picked up from the scoping document. For example, Buckinghamshire, they got in a bit of a pickle with their 106 agreements, and they did a piece of work which I believe took 2 to 3 years, but their decision was to hand it over to Oxford County Council, and that's how they work their system. It's administered through the County Council. But thank you for that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie Brockway, over to you.
I can't get in, Chairman. Oh, I'm in now. Sorry, I was just thrown out of the meeting. It's back in now. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say I think this is absolutely an excellent piece of work, not just because it gives us possible thoughts on the way forward, but because it's highly educative. This sort of document really needs to go out to all the parish councils and district councils because it gives very complex information in a very user-friendly manner. And I think that's important when we're dealing with things as contentious as developments. I just wanted to suggest perhaps you might consider adding one word to recommendation 1, please. In the penultimate line, it talks about to ensure that new developments have as little impact as possible on existing residents, communities and businesses. That's fine, but sometimes we want developments to have impact on communities. I wonder if you would consider including something like ensure that new developments have as little negative impact, to make it clear that we're not anti-developer or anything like that. But that would be the only thing I would suggest. Really, really excellent and interesting piece of work. Thank you ever so much.
Back to you, Linda.
I personally wouldn't have any objections to that, Chairman. I don't know if Justin's got a view on that.
I think it's a very helpful suggestion. Thank you.
Yep. One of the things I'd like to see happen is some of the contributions that we're making today can go as an attachment, as it were. I'm sure that our committee will approve the paper, which is what we're being asked to do, but it would be also relevant to have the positive contributions made today included in the paper that actually is going to the leader. So that could be taken in if we agree when we come to the end of our discussion. Right, Councillor Marfley, Hugo.
Good morning, Chairman.
Morning.
Morning. Yeah, no, a good report, thank you. Start with number 1. I completely agree. the planning policy over the last God knows how long has always been about urban centric. It gives no regard for places like Lincolnshire. It talks of sustainability, with Lincolnshire not being at all sustainable in their eyes at times. And I think actually the planning system in general has been a bit of a disaster. It's over the years, it is getting better. We are building better quality houses with better designs, more synthetic into the areas. And I think that actually we should oppose national government. The only thing I think needs to go in there is that if we oppose it, we should write in and give the reasons why we oppose it, because otherwise the uneducated will remain uneducated. And therefore it defends us better to actually defend our case, and it should be sent back to whoever is in charge of the planning system at the time. Number two, I like the idea of building relationships and working with them, but I think that the one thing that does happen is that we are constantly evolving. So this isn't always about the big boys. It's always sometimes the guys that build 6 houses and 10 houses in our villages and small towns. And in some sense, you struggle to get relationships built on those that might just do a development which takes that guy 1 year or something. But what is always welcome is if he rings Lincolnshire and they go out their way to help him, he will respect everything in the system. And that, in effect, is what it's getting to. But just bear in mind that it should be not just the big players in the industry. It should be actually all of them. And actually, there are quite a few smaller guys that do really good jobs out there. The other bits, which I think it was item 3 or 4, which talks about sort of, i.e., have we got all the money? What happens if we don't get the money? Well, if you go to do a little building development in Tilby, where I live, it will cost you a lot more than doing it on the edge of Louth, because you'll have to use stone. You will have to use this. Your whole building materials goes up, and the chances are your costs will go up. So therefore, the funding is less. But in the sense of that, and this is where I'm sort of coming to with the smaller communities, is that sometimes we allow 5 houses to be built in a village or a smaller community, and the village hall is in desperate need of money. And in some sense, that's why this is also about a sliding scale. It's all wonderful when the big boys come in and there's cash flying everywhere, but actually in our smaller communities, the size of these projects are smaller, but we still need money going into little infrastructural areas. And the final thing really about the infrastructure funding statement, if you're going to do that, may I recommend that you use examples so that it highlights, and it could be 5 houses built in Tilby and there was a little bit of funding went to, say, the village hall, and 10,000 houses built on the edge of Lincoln, and actually you can get round Lincoln much quicker now because they've helped the dualling of the bypass, etc. And I think because the more people get to understand it, the better the buy-in. Planning causes so many resentments in communities because people actually don't understand the complexity of it all. And I think if you're going to do a funding statement, just do it with some examples. The more people buy in, the more people are happier with it, and the more people come forward with the issues rather than, oh God, they're building that on my thing. And I agree with you in that number 1 statement. It is about planning, is about developing, but it's not also. And what really absolutely drives me mad is when some residents have to look at a mess for 10 years because somebody's put foundations in and they don't give a toss about the community, and the community is left looking at a mess. And I think that it's completely unacceptable that no one has the right to drag down a community in battling and fighting over planning. I'm passionate about it. That's my bit over with. And too many times it happens. But all in all, a very good paper. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Hugo. Clearly your passion showed, and a lot of people would agree, including me. So,
well, if I may,
yeah,
that says everything about planning, doesn't it? And local communities. It's about passion. And I'd love to come and live where you live, Hugo. It sounds very upmarket. But what I would like to say is I think it would be important if everybody could look at the feedback that was done. I forget the gentleman's surname, but his name was Phil. He was absolutely brilliant on our committee. And if you could see the feedback that him and perhaps Justin and his team had given to the white paper consultation, I think that would give you a lot of confidence, Hugo, that we are addressing those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin, did you want to come in there?
Very briefly, I think in the recommendation where we talk about building a strong relationship, strong doesn't mean permissive. Strong doesn't mean always agreeing. It means honest. It means clear. And I think it's very important that when we take forward that part of the action plan, we are not simply saying that a relationship with the developer has to be based upon us agreeing with them all the time. It has to be based upon us being honest and clear about our decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Ray Watson, any more speakers?
Yes, Chairman, we've got two more speakers, Councillor Eddie Strengle and Councillor Andrew Newton.
Great. Okay, first of all, Eddie.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Linda, for an excellent report. Fully concur with all my colleagues so far. I won't go over the ground that they did. Suffice it to say that we in the City of Lincoln Planning Committee, which I've served on for 25 years now, went through this paper with fine detail, and we were very concerned about a lot of the findings, or the proposals, should I say, by the government on these issues. I think the main thing, rather than going over the grounds that my colleagues have, which are excellent, the main concern really is the removal of democracy from the committees, and we already have discretionary powers when planning to deal with various minor planning issues, and this seemed to be a further removal. So I fully agree with the recommendations that you put forward, Linda, and I thank you very much for your report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor, that's really kind of you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Councillor Newton, Angela.
Good morning. Thank you. And I'd like to pass on my thanks to Linda and the team who turned this around so quickly, because I know sometimes when you're chairing these scrutiny panels, it can go on much longer. So clearly you've done a fantastic job. I was really wanting to support nearly word for word what Hugo said and some of the language he used, because it is tough. And we are a rural county, and we're not like all the counties that the government talk about. We're different, and I do believe, we've got to work out these relationships with the builders and fight for our communities, because what gets built, and sometimes in the future without a lot of democracy, we've got to, and our children and their children have got to live with for a long time. So I think what you've put together is really first class. And I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. That's very kind of you. Just one point, I'm not quite sure if I made it clear. It would be good if people who are district councillors, dual hatters, if they do look at the feedback that their district council actually gave on that white paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Good idea. Nigel Pepper.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As you know, I'm a man of a few words, and it's really all been said. But I'd just like to say thank you, Linda, and your team for an excellent report. Very well done. Thank you.
Oh, bless you, Nigel. Thank you, Councillor Pepper. That's lovely of you. Thank you.
Fine.
Chairman, I've got Councillor Rob Kendrick wants to come back.
Okay, I think I'll make this the last, unless anybody who hasn't spoken already. But okay, over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Chairman. I was just wondering, and this is probably a silly question, but it's probably already been dealt with. But does this report, or should this report, go to our local members of Parliament? Do they get an exec summary of it, or I'm just thinking of maximising the lobbying aspect of getting our concerns over to our parliamentarians? Thank you, Chairman.
There is no reason why we can't do that. None whatsoever. And if you're making that plea, it's going to the executive. A lot of the things that have been said by members of this committee this morning will be included in a covering note, and that can be one of them. So I don't see a problem, and I hope Linda doesn't either.
I thank you, Chairman. I personally don't see a problem, but I will let Justin have the last word on this. Yeah. But I'd like to thank everyone this morning for their input and their kind words as well. That's very kind of you. 3 meetings is a short space of time, and we could have delved in a lot more with more time, but that's how it was, and we've completed the challenge. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Justin, did you want to pick up on what Councillor Wotton?
Simply to reassure you as a board that Tracy from Democratic Services and I have taken copious notes. We'll reflect them back to Councillor Wotton, and your comments will be communicated into the executive as you've asked.
That's lovely. Okay, draw a line now. I think everybody's had the chance to speak, and to both praise the speed with which this was conducted, the thoroughness, the depth of it, and secondly, to make a contribution. All I want to say by way of summing up is that this white paper didn't seem to be designed to tackle any of the problems that Lincolnshire may have. It was designed because of overheating in some other parts of the country where they want to see development continue at a pace. I think that the point that was made about the impacts on Lincolnshire on page 26, the 5 bullet points there, that need emphasising because it gets to the heart of the negative impact that this white paper would have on Lincolnshire. But that's my contribution. Finally, if we move back to the beginning, and what are we asked to do? Approve the draft final report attached at Appendix 1 as the report to the developer contribution, and of course an accompanying note which Justin's going to prepare, and Tracy, of the contributions of our committee. We're working on the principle, I think, in this particular case, of saying that is what we're going to do, and does anybody want to offer any dissent? If not, then can we agree that that is the way forward? No dissent, so I'm picking up, is that right, Nick?
No dissent, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we then agree that that is true? I think that's agreed. So if we can thank you for all the hard work. It's been said many times, and all I will just do is add my thanks to you and the people that contributed, members of the Scrutiny Committee and also officers. Thanks for a great job.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parkin. Thank you. Item
8, Draft Infrastructure Funding Statement, a report from Brendan Gallagher, Principal Planning Officer, on a draft infrastructure funding statement, which will be presented to the Leader of the Council between the 18th and the 23rd of December. The views of the board will be reported to the Leader as part of his consideration of this item. Thanks. Brendan?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Parker. So as you've explained, you've got the draft infrastructure funding statement, or IFS, in front of you, the proposed report to Councillor Hill, and you also have a cover report to OSMB. If I can, I'll go straight into some of the details of the IFS and come back to the covering reports. So the IFS starts from page 47, and the detail of it really is in page 48 onwards. So as is explained in the introduction, there's 3 sections to the IFS to cover the obligations under the regulations. I won't spend any time explaining developer contribution, particularly given the previous item. I take it for granted that everybody understands Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL, and Section 106 or planning obligations. But what I will say is, nationally, those 2 regimes can work together and do work together, even in the areas of Lincolnshire where we have SIL adopted. Section 106 does continue in a form. So this is the first IFS that's been prepared. It's the first year that it's been required to be prepared. So that's why it's the first time we've seen it. And this relates to the year 2019-2020, so ending March 2020. The section 1 of the IFS relates to Community Infrastructure Levy, and is a statement on future intentions of SIL. The first few paragraphs really explain some of the onward joint working that will be done with district councils, the kind of things that were talked about under the previous item. The only real element of detail in that section is in section 1.6, which reports on some of the funding that's been received after April 2020, including and after April 2020. No requirement in the regulations to report that, but it's useful to give an indication of what has come in over those months. And we also explain that that's been used to put towards the Lincoln Eastern bypass, as was part of the established sort of policy strategy jointly with the relevant districts. We've then got section 2 of the statement, which is the SIL report, as it's referred to in the regulations. Much of the requirements, much of the sub-requirements for the SIL report don't apply to us as a county council, but the few that do apply to us, there weren't any relevant amounts during the year because nothing was received in the year up to March 20. And then we have section 3 of the IFS, which is section 106 report. There's about 9 subheadings which apply to section 106 or planning obligations, and those are covered at the bottom of page 49, on page 50, and the tables of 50. I won't labour on any of the details of those, but they're there for members of the board to see. So turning to the report to the leader and the recommendation in that, so we're asking Councillor Hill to approve the IFS for publication. And on that basis, we're asking OSMB to consider the report that's put to the leader, Councillor Hill, and to agree to provide any additional comments. Is there anything you'd like me to look at in any detail, Chair, or
thank you.
Take questions, etc.?
You're right. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask? You know, so the floor is open to members of OSMB. Have we got any speakers, Councillor Watton?
None at the moment, Chairman.
Okay.
Chairman, quite happily to speak.
Good. I'm quite happy to hear you, Hugo.
I'm sort of charging to. I'm just sort of going through that sort of detail of the report, and in effect, this is really sort of following on from recommendation 6, isn't it? I think of the previous report, and it's in effect the draft copy. When I'm sort of looking through it, and one of the things that when I see a lot of planning applications arise, and it's always about infrastructure levy, whichever way you look at it, or whether it's a section 106, often the one area is that it's always in effect deemed though it's going to schools or it's going to a GP surgery. They're the two primary cases that draw on often funding. And I'm sort of looking at the report in the back, and it's a bit sort of, I don't think it's particularly clear whether it is schools, although it does say sometimes primary. Personally, I think it should be clearer. I mean, is it a statement for the public or is it just a statement for the council? Is really number one. If we're not interested in the public with it and it's just a statement, well, no one's going to read it and it'll just get buried apart from the executive, or we will have a look at it. And so therefore, but it just, I don't think it really highlights the benefits of what we're trying to achieve as good as it could be. It's a first draft, I get that. If it's a public, well, it wouldn't really mean anything and it would just be used for kindling. But, you know, I do think we do pump a lot into schools. We do pump a lot into GPs and health. They are the primaries. But there are others, and I think you could do a better job, personally, in just highlighting really the benefits. It's quite a confusing read. That's my only thing. Thank you.
Okay, so Brendan, can you pick up the key word? What does publication mean? In the sense of it's, as Hugo said, it's a document. Okay. To what extent does it need to be published to the world? And if it is going to be published, what form is it going to take? Is it going to be an enhanced version of what we're reading today?
The draft, as you got it, is proposed to be put on the website and to be available on the website. So it would be in the public domain, in effect, if that goes some way to answering the question. It would be in the public domain and could be seen by members of the public. I don't envisage that there will be a huge interest from members of the public. There might be as the years go on and people understand what it is and seek to draw things out from it.
Okay. Ray, have we got any other speakers?
Not at the moment, Chairman.
Okay. Well, could I fill the gap by talking and building on what Hugo's already said? When you say there won't be a huge interest in the public, when we read on page 49, and I'll read it briefly, during the years of March 31st, 2020, Lincolnshire County Council entered into obligations which, when triggered, will total £11.8 million. Now, when we talk about money like £11.8 million, that usually pricks up a few interests in the media. And we particularly have the schedule, which I'm only guessing may well amount to 11.8 million. But some of them, are of interest. I'm interested in knowing whether or not we want to make this a public statement in the sense of saying, hey, look at this, we've got obligations for 11.8 million, and they cover virtually the whole of the county. I think a bit more in the south than in the north. There's one in my particular division that I'm interested in. To what extent are we going to be making this clear, as opposed to just popping it out? Are we going to market it? And if so, how are we going to market it, and for what reason?
Certainly wasn't my intention to market it, and that's not to say we couldn't market it. Of course it could be, and if that's something that either OSMB or Councillor Hill seek, then we can look at ways in which we can do that. I take your point about the paragraph on page 49, and I think in view of that, I ought to actually reword it, because I think the word is will. I think, as we've talked about, not every agreement which is signed up to will be delivered against. This is in reference to the previous item. There are lots of schemes which will secure consent and might not necessarily come forwards. So I ought to change that will to a would, and I'll take that as an action to do so. I can also take it as an action, if it's sought for us to do so, to look at whether we should do something more to advertise the statement.
Okay, fine. Members of our OSMB can pick up on that point as to whether we think that's a good thing to add to whatever goes to Martin Hill. So, Councillor Wilson, who's next?
Yeah, Councillor Hugo Marfleet wishes to come back and speak again, Chairman.
Indeed. Hugo.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I, as you say, 11 million is a lot on the bottom of page 49. And I think, and then you've received another 2 million during the year, etc. Now, obviously, but then go to table 1 on the top of page 51, location, Eppingham Road, Stamford. And then it goes to be spent at Stamford Welland. Primary element already spent on Malcolm Sargent. I mean, that means nothing to me. That means nothing unless you happen to live in that road. Is that a primary school? Is it, what is it? I mean, and who's Malcolm Sargent? I mean, and this is, I'm looking at this from, if you put this in the public domain, what is that telling me? It doesn't really. And then the next one, Popular Close, towards additional secondary capacity in Ruskington only, to be drawn towards the development of St George's. Well, I presume you're talking about the school, but presumption is always dangerous. What have you done? Have you just given it them? It doesn't say anything. It just says allocated but not spent. But it really doesn't say, and this is where I'm trying to get to you with it. It's all right if you happen to live in that street, but it doesn't say anything really, does it? It's not saying it's a school. Just presume that everyone knows St George's is a school. But if you don't live in that area, you haven't got a clue it's a school.
I think it's fair to say, Hugo, that this was intended as, I can't help but feel, an internal document as opposed to an external one.
Yeah, so, but still, as councillors, I wouldn't necessarily know everything that's necessarily in Ruskington or Stamford, and certainly not by street names. I might know quite a bit about those areas. And so therefore, it should be more, this went into a secondary school for additional classroom spaces or something that gives us a bit more meat on the bone. That's my only thing.
Yeah, I think that's a point well made, actually, in the sense that the appendix particularly needs expanding if we're going to make it into an outward-facing document as opposed to an inward-facing one. Councillor Wotton, any more?
Yeah, I've got Justin Brown wants to make a comment, Chairman.
Lovely. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you both. The previous discussion that we had, one of the notes I made from the comments you were making is that the infrastructure funding statement needs to explain outcomes to people. So this is why we ask for something. This is what we are seeking to achieve. And that fits very much with the approach that Councillor Mrs Wotton's scrutiny panel wanted to look at, which was about clarity of communication. So I think what I will do is work with Brendan and the team over the next few days to take on board the suggestions that the OSMB has made so that we can prepare something that shows very clearly that we are using the funding to the benefit of the local community. So I can take that action back to work with Brendan, Councillor.
That's lovely. Can we just pause on this subject for a moment, because I'd like to bring in the Chief Executive, Debbie Barnes, who may have some information about the current situation with government in COVID.
Sorry, Rob. No, I wanted to just speak on this item. I think it's about 11:30 when we'll get an announcement.
Fine.
Sorry.
Okay, right person, wrong subject. Over to you, Debbie.
I feel like a complete letdown now. I feel as though you built me up and now I've let down the committee. So sorry about that. It was really a suggestion also for us perhaps to engage with the communications department about what would be helpful to put into the public domain. It may be that it would be better to put an executive summary out, but absolutely listening to the comments of Councillor Marfleet have been incredibly helpful, and I think there's something that we need to do about this document and also consider about what type of document would be best to put into the public domain. And if myself and Justin and Brendan take that away, we'll talk to comms about that.
Okay, that's good. Fine. Councillor Wotton, anybody else?
No bit this time, Chairman.
Okay, Brendan, your paper. Anything that you want to say by way of a final contribution?
Just one sort of footnote very quickly, and it's, I suppose, an apology on behalf of the regulations. Some of the wording might seem strange and not helpful at times, but some of the wording that comes through is in specific response to the regulations. So that's why some of it might potentially seem strange and opaque. And in relation to the specific comments that were raised about whether the contributions related to schools, I think the two which were mentioned do relate to schools, if that's helpful. Okay. Obviously we can detail that.
So we've got a recommendation that the leader of the council approves the publication of a document attached at Appendix A as our infrastructure funding statement. I think we're saying the document attached in an amended form. And if we agree with in an amended form, do we agree with the recommendation as amended? I'm not sure if we need to vote on this. Nick,
Chairman, you indicated at the start of the meeting that we'd have a roll call vote on this item.
Great. So roll call vote.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
I believe Councillor Brockway has left the meeting temporarily.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Macy.
For.
Councillor Marfleet.
For with the comments, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Newton.
For.
Councillor Oxbee.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
For.
Councillor Strangle.
For.
Councillor Ray Wootton.
For.
Thank you. That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Justin, as well. Okay, if we now move on, the next item on the agenda, which is item 9, the Corporate Support Services Review, Scope Prime Provider Update and Draft Model. Presentation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Do you want me just to start, Chair?
Would you please, James?
Thank you, certainly, yes. Good morning, everybody. So the purpose of this report, as you're all aware, we contract out, well, we have a contract with Serco to deliver some of our services in the council, and it's quite a range of services. All of those services are in a single contract, and that contract will expire in March 2024. So we're a fair way off that, but this is some early thinking that we're doing around how we would like these services to be delivered post March 2024. And depending on the decisions that are made by council the way that they're delivered, they will have quite significant lead-in times to get those things right, be that through a procurement, be it through consultation, etc. So there's a fair amount of work, but this is the start of that process. And so what we've got today is there's a covering report, but also some slides that we'll talk through. Sophie Reid will talk through the non-IMT slides, and then John Wickens will talk about ideas we have around IMT from 2024 onwards. So that's the purpose of it. And as I say, it's the start of the process and would really welcome any thoughts from you, but also ensure that we keep you engaged during this process as well. So with that, Chair, I'll hand over to Sophie, please, to talk through the slides. Thank
Lovely.
you.
Sophie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping that Gail's going to be putting up the slides for us, and she is. That's excellent. Thank you, Gail. Just waiting to see them come up. Thank you. As James has pointed out, the contract that we have with Serco expires in 2024. We can't extend it any further than that. It covers a range of services: IT, payroll and HR admin, finance, and the customer service centre. We started the work early, really, I think, because of the complexity of the possible service model in IT. We need plenty of time, as James indicated, to work through that. So we've started with IT, and we'll be looking at the other services that are covered by Serco in the spring next year. It's our intention to keep you regularly informed about the work that we're doing. So our intention is to come to you quarterly, giving you updates on where we are with this project. What we'd like you to do today in particular is consider three matters. And those matters are the scope of the services that should be included in the corporate services project, the type of contract model we use, and also give us some feedback on early thoughts around what the shape of IMT might look like. Now, in terms of the scope, we have some commissioning principles that will help us determine what things we should be looking at included in the range of services covered by the project. So in 2012, CLT came up with some commissioning principles, and those principles were endorsed by the executive at the time. Essentially, you'll see from that slide that where there is an appropriate market, because that's not always a given, as we'll go on to find out, we should consider outsourcing those services that are primarily transactional, low risk and routine. Conversely, we should be retaining those services, either that are high risk services or those services which are necessary to provide the council with strategic direction and control. And since we've had those principles in place, we have seen them applied in terms of back office support services on a couple of occasions. So in 2015, the council, adopting those principles, decided to insource accountancy and health and safety from Michelle at that time into the council. And again in 2018, the council decided to bring back the professional HR services from Serco. In addition to the commissioning principles, the council is already and also at the same time carrying out significant transformation activity, and that transformation activity is about the way we work together, the way we deliver services, the way we engage our communities, and that incorporates some of the support services in the council. So, for example, there are corporate projects in play that are relevant to procurement, legal, business support, corporate landlord, and it makes no sense really to include those services in the scope of the corporate support services project because they're subject to their own reviews. So because of those reasons, the recommendation of the group who's carrying out this work is that we shouldn't extend the scope of the corporate support services project beyond those services that we know we need to extend and that are currently delivered by Serco, and they're set out on the slide. So again, they're IMT, payroll, HR admin, the CSC, and finance services, both finance services in adult care, but also the exchequer services. The other question that we're asking you to look at today.
Sophie, could we just pause there? Because that's the end. That's the end of one particular section, isn't it? So can we have a discussion about from the OSMB in relation to the scope of the services on the slides just shown. In principle, do we agree with that list that's been put up on the one hand, and do we agree, secondly, that it shouldn't be extended or, for that matter, reduced? So, any thoughts on that? Okay, I guess that means silent for the moment. We'll come to a vote at the end as to whether or not that we're agreeing with that particular recommendation, no expansion. So, okay, if nobody wants to make a comment, maybe you'll reflect on it and come back towards the end of the presentation. But on you go, Sophie.
Thank you, Chairman. So moving on to the second question. The second question we would welcome feedback from OSMB on is really about the type of contract that we let. So the Corporate Support Services contract with Serco is a single contract with a prime provider or a single provider where all of those services are delivered by Serco or its subcontractors. So the council only has one organisation to hold accountable for that wide range of service delivery. Technically it's called a business process outsourcing contract, but really that's all that it means, is that we've contracted with one supplier for a range of services. We've carried out a recent options appraisal, and we did that in 2018 and in 2020 about whether or not we wanted to use that same contract model again, whether it was still fit for purpose, bearing in mind that the arrangements currently were commissioned in 2013, some considerable time ago now. Both of those options appraisals concluded that it was not in the council's best interest to contract on that basis, but also it went further than that. It identified that there was no real ready market anymore for contracts of the Serco type, the Michelle type. Now, the reasons for that is that the marketplace has seen 10 years of austerity, and working for local government is no longer as attractive commercially for them as it used to be. Also for councils find themselves in a position where they have to manage their budgets. To do that, that's becoming increasingly challenging. To do that, you need flexibility, and tying up big chunks of budget in long-term contracts isn't the best way of managing those challenges. So the model has fallen out of favour, both with the providers and with other authorities. We have seen that confirmed in a number of reports, but perhaps more interestingly, we've got access to all the contract notices that every authority has to publish when it goes out on a procurement exercise. And we had to go back as far as March 2015 to find other contracts of this sort being let by other authorities. So the evidence is pretty strong that it's fallen out of favour and probably wouldn't be available to us in any event. So in 2020, we concluded, and the main reasons for that was that the BP option was rejected because it wouldn't suit our commissioning intentions, and that's critical, and John will go on to talk to you about those commissioning intentions, but also because there wasn't really a ready market out there. Even if we wanted to contract in that way, it would probably be very difficult for us to do that. So what we then did in 2020, and this is something that as part of this exercise we will revisit, was look at the market position for the individual service elements to see what the viable alternatives might look like. And we came to the conclusion, the CSC, that we couldn't really find an external provider providing similar services to those services that Serco provide in our customer service centre. What they do is include a significant proportion of social care activity, and most of the CSCs that we've seen and reviewed dealt with much more standard corporate straightforward activity, requests for information, quite transactional information. So we think there would be a marketplace perhaps for that simpler activity, but it would be more difficult to attract an external provider to deal with the whole of what Serco are dealing with now. There isn't a lot of competition out there. In terms of payroll and HR admin and exchequer and finance, that was the same. We couldn't find a marketplace of commercial external providers who were providing those services to local government. They were providing those services widely, but local government payroll, for example, is very niche, very specific, and there weren't any external providers. So that points to us looking at shared service opportunities or possibly insourcing those services. We haven't started looking at that work yet, but we will pick it up again in March next year. IMT is different. IMT, we were able to find a very healthy marketplace. It's a mature marketplace. It knows who it wants to contract with and on what terms it will contract with. We're satisfied, having looked at it, that the council can source its IMT requirements from that marketplace. And John will go on to talk to you about that in more detail in a minute. My final slide really is just to look at a high-level timeline against which this work will be carried out. So we've started the IMT investigation already. That work has been ongoing for a month or so. We are looking at extending the scope of the investigatory work in the spring to include those other service streams carried out by Serco. We'll hope to provide an options appraisal confirming the position and our recommendations, moving to the decision-making process about this time next year. So I've got nothing else to say, Mr. Chairman, but very happy to take any questions on that.
Okay. Ray, have we got any questions on this area?
Chairman, not at the moment.
Okay. Sophie, could I just ask about what your assessment is moving forward on the ease or difficulty that we'll find to get an external provider for payroll and adult social care? You seem pretty trippy about IMT, but not payroll and adult social care at the moment.
At the moment, based on the work that we've done previously, I think we would have difficulties finding additional providers in addition to Serco providing those services. We've not had any engagement with Serco about what they might want to do going forward, but there isn't a ready-made competitive marketplace out there to our knowledge at the moment. And we can do some more work, and we'll do some more work around that. Next year, we'll see what we can do to stimulate the marketplace. I think the adult social care elements in the CSC might be easier to deal with than payroll. I think payroll will be difficult to find other external commercial providers. I think if we were going to find somebody else, it's more likely at this stage to be a shared service arrangement.
Can you just remind us or tell us, we've had a big contract with Serco covering lots of things and it expires, can't be extended, the big contract. Does that mean that Serco would be in the frame for any of a small contract, like what they're providing at the customer service centre?
I think they would be. I think it would depend how we package that. I think Serco are still committed to providing services to local government. They see it as a place that they've got to make themselves relevant. I think they would be interested, particularly to see how they could continue to add value around social care, for example, because I guess that's where the money and the challenges are in local government. And if you're serious about being a local government provider supplier, you need to have an offer in that space. So I think they would be interested in that.
And they wouldn't be prohibited by virtue of them having a contract in the past?
No.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay, Ray, over to you. Who's down to speak?
I've got James wants to speak now. James Jury.
Okay, James.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add really to the point there, you asked specifically, and I appreciate it was an example, but you asked specifically about the customer centre. Part of what our thinking needs to be as well is what will that service be like in 2024, and what does it need to be like beyond that, and therefore links to a more digital approach and things within the transformation programme as well. So I think what we would be looking at is not what we currently do today, and therefore what we need to do in the future, and that may or may not alter the market interest in what we're looking to propose. So that's why there's quite a lot of work involved in this. It's not just a lift and shift because we've been delivering it that way for a long time. It's how can we challenge some of that and ensure that we're getting a modern, responsive service that's right for our residents and businesses in the county.
Okay. Right. Anybody down to speak?
No more speakers at this time, Chairman.
Okay, moving on. It's John now. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were asked within the CSSR programme, the Corporate Support Services programme being run by Sophie, to start early working on the thinking for the IMT service. And it's worth recapping a couple of points that Sophie has already touched on. One is that the IMT is a significant proportion of the existing contract. And as such, it's quite important to consider IMT in and of its own right. And reminding ourselves that the commissioning principles, when you look at them, IMT was never a convenient fit into sort of either category really, because IMT, thinking of IMT as one homogenous service, is just simply not reflected in reality. So yes, we do have sort of low value transactional services that fit that model very well and provided very efficiently externally, and they might be things like the support desk operation, which has some synergies incidentally with the contact centre, generating some 11,000 telephone calls in the last year. Whereas clearly we also have activities that are highly strategic, have a deep impact on the council's ability to provision its services going forward. So there was always elements of IMT you could equally and easily classify on either side of that commissioning principles balance. So I can have the next slide, please, Gail. The wanted to spend some time on the drivers and principles. So I will go through these slides in some details and less so in the subsequent slides. But it's very important in any sort of decision tree that the first part of the tree is accurate and considered. So I'm looking at the drivers. The things that we've called out are the growing need for agility. We feel one of the things that's going to become increasingly important and kind of reflects the effects of technology on business in general is our ability to exploit opportunities, deliver business value quickly, rather than sit on sort of protracted opportunity costs. The ability to, as I said, manage that ongoing change as part of that dynamic. We to some extent see the new normal as ever accelerating requirement for the organisation to change and adapt going forward, and to be responsive and delivery focused. The technical drivers are that some of the changes we see in the market are a reaction to the shift to cloud services. So that basically manifests itself in that we are less and less now as an IMT service about buying technology, building it, making it work, and the care and feeding of that technology, but increasingly procuring services and working out how to exploit those services to the benefit of the whole organisation. So the nature of the IMT service is changing fairly fundamentally in terms of those elements that we sort of manage internally. And the other thing we see is that reflecting that broad church of IMT being many things being brought together under the banner of IMT, we start to see very few organisations now who claim to be experts across the field. Increasingly, we see vertical markets developing within the overarching market, where they have the depth of technical expertise in that specialism to compete in the market, and that means they have quite prescribed services. And they are really quite strict in not moving outside their business model and their service design in order to both protect their brand, protect their reputation, and not take adventures and risk into untested elements of service provision. So they tend to stick to trusted and tried models that are developed as a reaction to that changing technology landscape. Commercial drivers repeats that fact. The market has changed fundamentally since 2013-15, when the specification was originally created, and the business of providing IMT services is now fundamentally different. That reflects in the reality that there are now, it would seem, very few prime providers, people who want to give that one-stop shop to deliver both those day-to-day transactional services right through to the more strategic services. And there were always question marks about the efficacy of that model, and that has become more stark over the intervening years. That has caused those prime providers that remain in the market to essentially start to act as brokers, where they assemble these specialist services themselves and essentially resell them. And that has much more limited value to organisations pursuing those services. So that calls us to think about the principles. Unsurprisingly, in a department that tries to use enterprise architecture principles, at the beginning of that particular methodology, you worry about those principles you will use to check your design work and service design work, that you are sort of meeting the needs of the organisation. And we resolved on these as a sort of minimum statement, if you like, of the high level principles we should adhere to. The first really reflects the commercial reality that as we move towards 2024, we will have to start to make some of these changes in advance and in readiness for service migration. But there should not be a step change in the gross cost of IMT services. And so as we move from 23-24 into 24-25, the aspiration and the design goal we've set ourselves is we should not see a step change in the gross cost of those services. Now, and we use the gross cost of services to mean both, yes, the revenue budget, but also an amortization of the capital spend year on year, because there will be a change in the balance of capital and revenue expenditure. But adding all that together as an amount of cash over, say, typically a 4-year period, and we should not see a step change in the cost of providing IT services to the council. And indeed, always looking for opportunities to reduce cost. We need to enable that agility in provision and delivery of business solutions. The primary advantage that cloud services has offered organisations in recent years is that agility, and we need to make sure that we can exploit that. To facilitate the council's operations and service delivery, supporting the shift to become increasingly digital. Bring digital to the heart of what we do, to make sure we have those most efficient processes and operations possible to deliver value for money. Focus on buying services, as I said, not technology, from experts in each field. And be open to IT specialists who do not typically offer non-ICT services. This is probably the principal argument for disaggregating at that first level, away from a more broad BPO public sector type prime provider model. The specialist organisations who are making the market now tend not to wander off of that plot. And indeed they tend to specialise in vertical markets within the overarching IMT market. Thank you. This slide tries to draw out a couple of things. That the changes will be incremental. In the journey from now to 2024, we will start to make certain changes in readiness. And that because some will be sort of service components that will be changed or stood up prior to 2024, whereas others will be classic service migrations or transitions, much as we did in the transition from Mooshell to Serco. It also conveys, sorry, the green top of the triangle also conveys that the expectation is, on balance, some additional services will be provided internally by LCC that are not provided internally today. And that reflects, again, that need to shape our service requirements to what the market offers. If I could have the next slide, please, go. This slide tries to point out the principal difference going from a prime supplier model to considering a small but multiple supplier model is that we have to build upon our intelligent client function to become what is known as a service integrator. We will be bundling these services in the most optimal way to ensure that we reflect what's available in the market, but establish value in the individual bundles in order to sort of maximise our effectiveness in procurement and limit the effort involved in the actual procurement itself. These slides attempt to compare as is to future state, and again, some of it's transitional in nature. So we have the timeline 2020 through to 2024. Red denotes services currently provided by Serco. Blue denotes the destination is that they are still effectively provided externally and by definition involve some procurement effort. So on this slide, you can see a number of those services currently in the most simple breakdown of the IMT service we could give for this purpose, that those services are ones where we expect to be reprocuring those services, bundled in some manner to optimise the opportunity. Whereas on the following slide, where we see this slide denotes some change, and in this slide, these services currently provided by Serco, which typically have a local provision dynamic. Local provision is not a strong feature of the market at the moment, as increasingly IMT services are delivered remotely, and there is a reluctance on the part of many providers to embed staff locally as well. They see embedded staff and those kinds of support arrangements being allied to legacy technologies, and obviously legacy technologies by 2024 will be greatly reduced, and it does not form a part of their business model and the sort of services they're investing and developing in. So we see often quite small services, things like the VIP support. Project technical delivery you will see mentioned again, because today it is done in two different ways, both working with Serco exclusively and where Serco offer support to third parties that we're working with more directly to deliver change. Whereas on the next slide, again, this slide is a no change slide. These are services that today are provided internally and on balance of probability will continue to be so. They either benefit from locality, or they benefit from being highly strategic, or require great knowledge and insight of council operations. There is a new service on this slide, which is Agile Development, principally around two platforms, Office 365 and Power Apps. And those are really a very significant element of that agility we talked about, delivering business value solutions rapidly through these highly accessible development capabilities that come in these new cloud services. Things that would have required a professional developer can now be done often by fairly modestly skilled people with no more than general office skills. And finally, on the next slide, so things that currently are provided externally from other providers, and again they continue somewhat in their current form. And again, we are looking at the need also to replace that ability to procure software and hardware efficiently through the creation of frameworks for that purpose. And that concludes really, Mr. Chairman, the slides that hopefully explain why we feel building the IMT service in this way is appropriate for the current market and the effects technology have had on it.
Thank you. Thanks again, John. Okay, open to the floor. Ray, who's down to speak?
I've got no speakers registered at the moment. Just to inform you that Councillor Bob Adams and Councillor Jackie Brockway have had to leave the meeting.
Thank you for that. Okay. Can I pick up while people are having the opportunity to think, if they want to, a couple of points that I'm interested in you telling me about, John. The first one is that in a typical SWOT analysis, where we look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, I'm interested, because I've heard a lot about, and so of colleagues, about the strengths of the report you've given and the opportunities. If you could try and play devil's advocate and tell us about the weaknesses and the threats of the system that with the way, the principles and rationale of this draft IMT model. Can you begin to make a contribution? Maybe James can come in. Where do you see, I'm not saying waking up in the night approach, but it is about you telling us the threats and the weaknesses of this model. Thanks.
Well, in some ways, that's I can achieve that by playing out what I imagine the strengths claimed were in 2013, 2015. So, you know, the attractiveness of the prime supplier model was always that people had come from a history where sometimes numerous suppliers would point at each other, blaming the other for some inefficiency, something not working, and so on and so forth, issues and problems. And you know, at a fairly simplistic contractual commercial view of that reality, it's tempting to imagine that one contract will somehow avoid that situation developing. I have to say, in practice, that isn't my experience. The same issues and problems manifest themselves, and very often the terms under which you've contracted give you limited routes to address some of those shortcomings, and you need to work in a you know, where somebody is also a strategic partner. It changes the nature of that relationship to where, to some point, you have joint culpability in some of the decisions being made. So the devil's advocate question is in that service integration and management. Sometimes you'll hear us use the phrase SIAM. Service integration and management is, if you like, the management technique that designs to minimise the effects of that that flow from using multiple partners to deliver a holistic package of services. However, over the years, the problem has become easier because of that. The effect of cloud services, you're buying rather homogenized services, very clear, very defined. They work for very large groups of organizations. There are many, many millions of subscribers in things like Azure and Office 365 and Amazon and Google and what have you. You do not get to fiddle with those services much. You get to configure them somewhat. And making them work together is a problem you share with the rest of the world. So it is not like where you've built your own infrastructure. I mean, that infrastructure is in many ways unique to the organisation and presents problems that, you know, would not manifest themselves everywhere. You tend to find the problems and issues that flow from the integration of cloud services are shared by a great many people, and the market reacts to that reality. So I'm not going to pretend there is a silver bullet. There is no perfect answer to this conundrum, but on balance, having a contractual back-to-back relationship with your prime partners puts you in a position to affect absolutely the outcomes that you enjoy or suffer. You know, do SIAM badly, there could be negative effects. It puts the stress on getting that management function correctly. So, sorry, quite a long answer, but an extremely important question.
Okay, but when you were speaking earlier in your presentation, you said something that I found interesting, and perhaps you might like to share your understanding of it. You said that we will need to shape our requirements to what the market offers. Okay, go on, tell us more about that.
I'll quote you a number that's very interesting. Since March of this year, Microsoft acquired an additional 120 million subscribers to Microsoft Teams. These numbers are huge. So organisations like Amazon and Microsoft are operating at such extraordinary scale of operations now that our ability to get them to customise their services to our requirements with a spend of a few million is essentially very, very low. They maintain good relationships with us. They are very interested in helping us exploit their technologies. They take back the problems and issues that we have, but only where they're shared across hundreds of organisations will they react to that. So to some extent, they save us from ourselves in that you adapt to what's available and the capabilities that are available, but they are very rich feature sets and there's not much in there that we would want for.
Okay, right. James, you look as though you wanted to speak, but you're not indicating.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think when you ask about the challenges, etc., I think for me, we should be in a position where our IT simply works. And I appreciate with some of the history that it is sometimes not always easy to believe. But the more we buy standard products and the less we customise them, the more the IT will work. The biggest challenge, therefore, for us is how, as an organisation, we use that technology in different ways. And we also accept that whilst Lincolnshire is special in many ways, it isn't special in that it needs its own version of systems. We can, if a system works well for local government, it's likely to work well for Lincolnshire County Council. So this is about working with and buying off-the-shelf products that aren't specialised and aren't customised, and then ensuring that they work effectively for Lincolnshire County Council. And as I say, the biggest challenge, therefore, for me is the change management, if you like, within the service areas and how we get to use systems in the appropriate way that are streamlined, sensible, and offer value for money, and don't therefore end up costing us more than we'd originally thought by customising them and changing them. So that to me is the biggest thing. I think the more we use those standardised products, then the less likely we are to have the type of issue that John referred to, where in the past different providers and suppliers have pointed at each other if there is an issue. So that's really important as well. So I think for me, it is a different approach to IT. We've started to see it with things like Office 365 and how we've moved to a standard approach with that. And to me, that works far better and provides us with greater transparency and reduced cost as well overall compared to having our own version of things.
Fine, thank you. Councillor Watton, have we got anybody who wants to speak?
Councillor Ray Watton. Sorry, Councillor Kendrick has asked to speak, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to the discussion, it strikes me that we're in an ever-changing world with IMT. I know lots of things are commercially sensitive with various authorities, but do we sort of pick up any lessons or ideas from other authorities? Obviously, if we're all sharing the same suppliers to some extent, their experiences, some people might be ahead of us in this. Do we learn from what they've encountered? I mean, I know some people may not wish to share information, but I was just wondering whether if another authority in another part of the country is sort of a few more miles down the road than we are, we can see how it's working for them. I was just wondering that as from a layperson's point of view, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kendrick. I think as you refer to layperson, it's probably better for me to answer than John. I think again, it's back to the fact that because we're using large scale, so Microsoft products as an example, they are used by a whole range of organisations, including councils. So I think there is a lot of learning that we can get from that. And I know John talks to a number of people in the area, and so do I. And I think there's certainly opportunities there to learn from others who are in some cases slightly ahead of us. And we've had some of those discussions already. I think that's really important. And that relationship that we've got with Microsoft and a couple of the other providers, I think will help with that as well. So I think it's a really valid point. And it's something that we do try to do and we'll keep building on.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Sorry, if I could just add in there to give you some reassurance, Councillor Kendrick, the area that John talked about that he felt was the most risk-laden area around the SIAM and managing the integration of those different providers so you've got a single seamless service is something we're going to be engaging with other authorities who are further down the line from us to really probe them about how they best manage that, what they've learned, what the opportunities are to do this as well as it can be, because it just seems, as you suggest, a really sensible thing to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak?
No further questions, Chairman.
Okay, fine. What we're asked to do as an OSMB board is to consider the report, which we've done, the presentation, and provide feedback in 3 areas. If I just briefly sum up, I think that we were extremely comfortable with the scope of services within the corporate support services review. Sophie's presentation at the moment, what's included and what's excluded in the slides that were shown. When it came to point 2, which was about the validity of a single business process outsourcing, I think we recognised that we did need to accept the end of what we might call the single unit provider and the need for specialisms. I think that the point that was made very clearly by both John and James was that we've got to look to what the services are going to look like in 2020, 24 and beyond. And the third point, the principles and rationale of the early draft IMT model. I think there is an issue about us needing to shape our requirements to what the market offers in the sense of what are the consequences of that. So I would ask that where we do buy an off the peg and alter, then we, I think as a board, need to know what are the consequences. There may be huge benefits, but it's about us knowing what the consequences of that are. So I propose the board receives the report and the feedback provided on these 3 points for the consideration of officers as the project progresses. Okay, if you disagree, can you indicate in the chat room? If not, then I propose that is accepted on the basis that there has been an opportunity to show dissent.
No one has indicated, Chairman.
No one's indicated. Okay, that proposal that we received the report and the feedback provided is accepted. Thank you, John. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, James, for the presentation. And I'm sure we'll be getting another one, which we'll discuss in relation to the agenda for future meetings. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. If we move on to item 10, which is the update on IMT services, data services and the Serco contract. 2 areas for an update. Want to invite John again and Paul Elveston to present the report on the Serco contract performance. We've also got Sue Klein, Head of Data Services and Business Intelligence, to answer any questions. So, John again and Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 75, in the covering report, we mentioned the fact that yourself, Mr. Chairman, and the Vice Chairman considered the matter of how you could get visibility over the whole operations of IMT, reflecting that in the previous reporting to Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, you saw those elements of IMT as encompassed by that Serco contract we've just discussed. And these 2 reports are our attempt to meet that aspiration. The second part is covering the ground as covered previously, and it just covers the KPIs of the IMT element alone within the Serco contract, but it does add additional dialogue, which we hope will add some value in terms of understanding current status, problems and issues that we might be working to at any point in time. The initial report talks about data services on page 77. And it page 77 essentially sets out the business requirements and the drivers that cause us to believe and have worked towards a strategy for some time now to create a data services foundation to support the council's operations. It makes a number of points, but basically it purports that data is an asset and has value to any organisation, and that value can persist over some time frame, be it hours or years after the event that may have created that data in the first place. And there is more complexity than might meet the eye in terms of collecting that data in a manner that it can be discovered, it can be compared and consumed safely by other business operations within the council. And effectively, what we've done is establish that capability and productionised it over the course of last year. And Sue's team now is providing support and business value to an ever-growing list of business services in their consumption of data. And it also provides a place where we can bring data in we have either purchased or we have gained under agreement with third parties subject to security and handling constraints in order to be legal. So, Sue puts this much more eloquently in those bullet points on page 77. Provide information in a consistent way, deliver one version of the truth, remove the barriers between silos of data and particularly make the data safely comparable, reduce the costs of the retention and storage of that data, reduce manual processing by automating some of the data movement operations, whereas at the moment we have a very large number of staff who copy and paste data between spreadsheets and those kinds of operations. It sort of underpins the one council ethos that we're all working from the same information and ensures that data is secure and adheres to best practice and security principles, not least of which is the General Data Protection Regulation. And Sue's team, as far as possible within resources available, can be reactive to new problems, just as they were to COVID, where automated the collection of COVID stats, brought them into this, what we sometimes still call the data warehouse, technically slightly obsolete name, but forgive me, and where it's made available for people to consume in products like spreadsheets and business intelligence and so on and so forth. Page 78 sets out really the current status. So we've, as I said, productionised the service and which has involved setting up the environment, rolling out new tools, both to the team and the BI elements to some elements of the council performance management teams and other places like that. We've automated the collection of certain data sets already, and there will be many more over the coming years. I mentioned the COVID involvement. We've built that for information and the data warehouse. Finally, built a master data management solution, which is because it sets the standards for the way we record data and transforms data from platforms that work to inconsistent standards to make sure the data has a standard meaning when people come to consume it. And I cannot emphasize how important that is and how shocking the disasters that have fallen other organizations who have not followed those principles when they've prepared these kinds of platforms. So the next steps are to increase the capacity within the team as it's now becoming productionized, working within the transformation program to identify target operations and practices that can be modernized and digitized. Work closely with the corporate leadership teams in service areas to understand their data needs and their data assets actually, and develop solutions to reduce repetition and support data processing, reporting and analysis to support business decision making, which ultimately is the goal of much of this activity. And establish the central data, a single point of reference. At the bottom of page 78, Mr. Chairman, many months ago, your committee challenged me to explain what we were doing about a situation that had developed with pensions data. At the bottom of 78, we explained that when we came to decommission the old ERP system, a product known as SAP, the precursor to what is now referred to as Business World On, it was discovered that the platform still supported critical operations inside the pensions function, and indeed we couldn't switch it off. And what we found, some data had been left on that system and was not represented in other platforms. And the obstacles that stood in our way to recovering that data were very significant, and not least of which the technical hurdles of mining that data. The fact that the SAP platform was not an LCC-owned platform, and we had no administrative access to that platform or legal right to access it in that way, and that created legal barriers which had to be overcome. And Sue and her team have worked tirelessly over many months, first overcoming the commercial and legal barriers, gaining access to the system, working with our Serco to commission Capgemini to do that data mining exercise, working with Serco's development team to create a new interface, which was very necessary as upgrading and extending the life of SAP would have been extraordinarily expensive. And I'm pleased to report that the platform is now in the latter stages of testing. We have, since the time of writing this report, discovered a small anomaly with one of the data sets, and we're having to go back in and recover some missing data. But the expectation is over the coming 2 months, we will have represented that data, which is extremely essential for the operation of the pension service and meet our legal obligations around running the pension service, and shut down the SAP platform, which is still costing us revenue to maintain access to under our agreement with Kia, who replaced the original owners, Michelle. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. Would anybody like to ask any questions on?
Have we got any questions? Okay, I'll kick off by saying, in relation to the last item that you were talking about, in relation to ERP transfer to Business World On and the issue around pensions, can you give us an estimate of the consequences of things not happening as they should have done historically, in the sense of impact on what we might call service users or individual people in relation to payroll and pensions, and how much it's cost to rectify it?
Okay. In terms of impact, as soon as the pension service realised that they still had this dependency on the SAP platform for historical records relating to pension contributions, the requirement to maintain access to that auditable data is a requirement by law within the Pensions Act, I believe. I'm not a specialist in this field, and I understand that warnings at least were issued to the Pension Service, and indeed it is just possible they went beyond warnings. So that was the first point. We had to become compliant with the requirements to provide the ability to, if challenged, look at pension contributions over a protracted number of years made by an individual, a retiree, and prove that their pension was being calculated properly. And I believe that's a requirement of the acts that support that. In terms of cost, I would be nervous of giving you a factual answer as a matter of public record. One figure I do know is that we pay £20,000 a month to continue access to that platform. As I said, it's not a platform that was ever owned by LCC, and that was not budgeted into last year and did create a revenue pressure for the IMT service. I would have to come back to you, Mr. Chairman, with a written record of the overarching project costs, because the project took many different forms over the years to try and address this problem. So we have very definite records for the project that Sue has run at my request. I am aware that other projects started and failed, and I would have to try and see if I can recover the records for that activity.
Thank you. I think that the point is valuable about the £20,000 per month, but there would also be the staff costs of dealing with it. And I suppose the primary question is, when we did the checks, did we find anything that was of negative? Did we find anything that had to be rectified because the pensions data was disadvantageous to pensioners' payments? So it's the rectification. Did the rectification show that whoops, we didn't do this, and as a consequence, some individual pensioners have suffered?
I'm not aware of that at all, Chair, but equally I will do some further work and come back to you on that. But I'm not aware of anything as you outlined at all, but I will double check that and look at the wider question you asked as well.
Okay. Right. Anybody else want to ask any questions? Okay, can I just turn to page 81, which is the ICT KPIs, which is something that Angela, Councillor Newton will know, going back to the days of value for money scrutiny committee. I'm just interested in the drop in the number of KPIs, and this is curiosity as much as anything else, because I can remember we started off with 40 KPIs. I know these are just IMT KPIs, but what's happened to the rest of them? Perhaps you could just give me an indication of that. Have they melted away into the snow, as it were?
I will refer to my colleague Paul Elston, who's very kindly stepping up in a long-term absence situation to support me. He's our contracts and licensing officer. But a more generic answer, really, Mr. Chairman, is that some were designed at the outset as a concept, but the data to deliver the KPI, measure the KPI was not available, and it was rather unobtainable conceptually, and so it was probably more a problem with the design of the KPI than any desire to fill it or meet it. It was just the practicality of actually measuring it became much more onerous than people imagined. But Paul, perhaps you could give a more specific example.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome.
Morning, Chair. There certainly have been a number of KPIs where it's been recognised that it's difficult to find a practical measure for them. One that comes to mind, I think, is the energy saving KPI, where unfortunately it's not proven possible to accurately or practically measure the sort of energy savings that have occurred, and therefore it was determined that it was no longer viable to maintain that as a KPI.
I think I would add to that, Mr. Chairman. We have had calls to create KPIs as well, and in terms of there are some service improvement initiatives at the moment where we're seeking to address an imbalance in the treatment of the reactive break fix service, the support desk, that transactional service I referred to earlier in the day. And where we measured incidents and service requests. So incidents are somebody phoning in for something that's not working and broken and what have you. Whereas a service request is not that so much that something is broken, but people need a service to be delivered, a product to be delivered, a piece of equipment to be changed or relocated, that kind of thing. And the KPIs were very effective for one, but not for the other. So what we have done is we've created a new KPI to reflect that, because it's quite important in the perception of the service to users. And we continue to work with Serco now to sort of fine tune the service and try and improve the service on an almost continual basis.
Okay, The reason I mention it is because, and perhaps we could discuss this outside the meeting. The word the letter K means key in terms of performance indicators. And if the Old Value for Money Scrutiny Committee and Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee determine that some KPIs are really key, then we would expect there to be reports explaining why these are not key performance indicators any longer. And we've managed to seek effortlessly from 40 or 41 to 13. And I just perhaps we could discuss this outside the meeting as to how that happened. That's all. Okay, does anybody else want to make any points in relation to our report? So, certainly, it's worth noting that the minimum service level has been pretty well established at a small number, 2 out of 11, none below minimum service level in October. So generally pretty satisfactory. But does anybody else want to comment?
Got no further speakers at this time, Chairman.
Okay. We just go back to what's been recommended. Required to seek assurance on the performance of the IMT Data Services Department. I think that was very well explained by John. And the Serco contract, I've made a number of points that I would like some assurance from outside of the meeting. Is that acceptable? Anybody who disagrees with that sort of brief statement I've made, please indicate in the chat room. Okay, not getting anything from the chat room, so the assumption is that there's the actions required. We have source assurance on both of them, so that proposal is therefore agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 11, which is of current interest to everybody, I'm sure. COVID-19 update. This is Michelle Andrews' paper. Provides an update since the last report on the 26th of November. So over to you, Michelle, to present the report, and there may be contributions from other people who've got more up-to-date information. Okay, thank you. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as we said at the last meeting, we wanted to present a monthly update about the situation and focus mainly on the things that had changed or the movement since the last meeting. It has been a very busy month and today's a very busy day. So as you say, we're expecting further announcements as the situation changes day by day and sometimes moment by moment. So the report I presented had the latest data in requested that was absolutely possible at the time of publishing the report. Obviously, this does change on a daily basis and is fluctuating. We are stabilising, but we are still seeing some areas of the county with higher levels than we had have hoped. What we've also outlined is the arrangements for the Christmas break and the easing of those restrictions. And as you say, they are very live press issues at the moment with regard to how people should look at supporting and seeing their families over the Christmas period. We remain in Tier 3, and I think the indication is that we are going to remain in Tier 3 as Lincolnshire, but as we say, we're waiting for confirmation of that. We have also set out the particular activity that's been highlighted since the last meeting, which is very much about the rollout of the vaccination programme, which has been a very active and live piece of work since we last met. It has been received very positively, and we have seen take-up of the eligible people in a very responsive way. And we know that all partners have worked really hard and really well together to make sure that we maximised our opportunities of offering that to as many people as possible that fell into those categories. I've outlined those within the report for people's information. And again, also what we want to try and highlight is the need to really focus our communities on taking good decisions both on a day-to-day basis but also over the next few weeks to minimise any potential increase to the rate with regard to how they hand space-based messages, and only seeing people if you feel there is no other opportunity to do so. What we've also looked at is working very much with our business partners as well. We've got other live issues that are coming up in the next couple of weeks with the Brexit at the end of the year, and so we have made a note of that within the paper as we are again waiting for the decision about the deal or no deal situation as we move towards the end of the month. We've also outlined around our exit strategy, and again, what will that mean to come out of a tier 3 situation? And again, looking at the live press issues, there's some details of how that will be measured and how that will be monitored on a fortnightly basis going forward. It is something that we obviously continue to monitor with our LRF partners. We have got twice a week the tactical group meeting, and on a weekly basis the strategic group meeting, and that is working very effectively to make sure communications are managed and that we respond in a quick and constructive way to any changes both nationally and locally. I'm hoping the content of the report gives you some outline of the work that's happened since the last meeting, and I'm happy to take feedback about what would be valuable and helpful to you in any reports going forward.
Smash it, really good. Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Watton, have we got any people down to speak?
I've got none requested to speak. Just to let you know, Chairman, that Councillor Andrew Newton has left the meeting.
Thank you for telling me. Appreciate it. Can you just say a word or two, Michelle, about Brexit? Only in the context simply of the work that you're doing. But the reason I say that is because while the situation remains fluid, you're quite right, it may become concrete sometime. Okay. What would be the difference in relation to the way that we respond if we do not get a deal with the EU, or we do get a deal? So
Chairman, apologies for interrupting you, but the Chief Executive Deborah Barnes would speak first, please.
Fine, I will always bow to Debbie. And if you want to include Brexit in your answer as well, that would be even better.
Happy to come in afterwards, Councillor Parker. It was just to give a bit more of an update on some of the COVID issues that are more recently happened than the paper, but more than happy to wait until whenever it's convenient for you, Chair.
Well, now you've got the floor, I wouldn't want to push you aside.
Oh no, this is the second time you built me up. So it's really just to add a couple of additional things. You will have obviously seen the announcements, and I see that Councillor Watton has put in the chat that Lincolnshire, the whole of Lincolnshire, is to remain in level 3. That's obviously just been announced by Matt Hancock in the House. Just the second thing to update people on is that there was an announcement this week about the return of schools in January. And what the schools will be required to do is to implement testing of certain pupils. So the communication that has gone to schools will require schools to test on a weekly basis those pupils who are in exam years, so 11 and 13, years 11 and 13. And that will also include those pupils in 11 and 13 year groups for those that go to further education colleges. And they will be required to do weekly testing. If anybody tests positive, then they will be required to go and get a PCR test. So one of the more accurate testing. And anybody who is within their contact group will therefore then be subject to daily lateral flow testing, which means that the whole bubble will not need to self-isolate, which clearly has been happening over the last couple of terms. In addition to that, all staff at secondary and in primary will also be required to do weekly testing of the lateral flows in the new year when the schools come back as well. So it's just really to update on those most recent announcements.
Okay, thank you for that. Lovely. Yeah. Okay. So back to Brexit is the only question on the table at the moment. Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So with regard to Brexit, I'm working very closely, obviously, with key partners. Justin Brown has been leading on our business and economy cell within the response and recovery groups. And we have outlined a risk assessment and done a risk analysis of the both deal and no deal, and some of the areas that are more, important to Lincolnshire. For example, we are in a different position to some other counties with regard to access in and out of the country. We don't have ports, etc., and airports, etc. So we are working with our counterparts in other regions, across the borders. We are obviously linking into regional and national groups on that. But we are confident we've got the plans in place. We for either a no deal or deal, and we feel that we are relatively well prepared for either situation, and we are continually monitoring that through our tactical group and strategic group, and the item will be on the agenda this afternoon to ensure all partners are prepared and have updated any risk assessments that might be needed.
Okay, so good planning, good thinking ahead, 2 papers, Brexit, no Brexit. What do the 2 papers look like in a sense in difference? So what do we do if there's Brexit? What do we do if we don't, if there's an agreement?
Debbie, I don't know whether you want to come in from a strategic perspective or whether you want me to talk about that operationally.
I'll make a start, and then it's a shame that Justin's gone, because Justin would have much more of the detail on Brexit. So I think the areas in terms of a no deal that are most affected are those areas that have got significant ports. Obviously, we're not an area that has got significant transport and trade through any ports, and so therefore we're not expecting that to significantly impact upon us. Although clearly the concern would be traffic tailbacks from Grimsby. But in terms of risk rating, we are a low risk rating in relation to that particular risk. The other risks really are around food supply and medicine supply. And I think it's fair to say that the perception is that a lot of those would be on a much more of a slow burn. It's not going to be on the 2nd of January that there is a problem. It will be much more of a slow burn, I think, is what we're seeing. National supply and food supply are being managed nationally. And so therefore our direct input around that is fairly minimal, because those are matters that are being dealt with from a national perspective. But that would be the sort of second issue that would be affected in terms of the no deal versus the deal. The third issue is in relation to information governance and the information that would be shared with us if we were to not have a deal. Clearly that affects the police much more than it does the local authority. Although, again, our information governance lead, David Ingham, is clearly working hard to make sure that we are understanding the risks for the local authority. But again, the risks for us are relatively low. They are much more significant for the police, and then would have a secondary impact upon us. So those would be the main issues that I would wish to highlight in terms of what a plan would look like around a deal or a no deal, and just to really reassure that the committee that we are considered a low risk area, mainly because of the port issue.
Okay, just one other question. Supposing we get a deal late, do we expect any difficulties with any sort of short-term problems because of backing up? I'm thinking primarily that the later the deal, the more difficult it is for us to respond. So is there anything about a late deal that would produce temporary problems?
Justin just rejoined the meeting. Debbie.
Justin's rejoined. Justin, so I'm going to hand over to Justin. I think that the challenge is for the businesses to understand what they need to do, and the later that it gets, I think then there's less time that the businesses have got to prepare, which affects our economy and our area more than us individually as a council. But seeing as Justin has rejoined, I'm going to hand over to the expert now.
Fine. Over to you, Justin.
Help you up there, Justin.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Parker, thank you. Forgive me if I repeat anything that's just been said. I've only just rejoined. But from the analysis that we have done, we believe that the main challenges over the next few days, so really between now and 31st of December, will be around businesses being able to respond to any new paperwork. So if they are importing, then the goods that they require will need to be registered with all the normal VAT paperwork, etc., within 6 months. So importing, if there weren't queues at border ports, should be relatively easy in the context of a no deal, and there is time to prepare. Exporting is where there is the challenge, because of course the border points within mainland Europe will be expecting new documentation. We've done some analysis of the business community, and most of them feel as though they are as prepared as any of their competitors over the paperwork that they require. What they are having significant challenges at the moment is getting container slots at the ports that they want those container slots to be at to export their product. So we are running advice lines. We are running seminars. We run 3 seminars a week at the moment on matters relating to Brexit. And we are having the best take-up across the Midlands. It is still a relatively low take-up. We have a phone line where we are proactively targeting businesses, asking them to be prepared. Their response is generally that they are not going to take any additional steps until they know whether there is a deal or not. So that's a risk for them. One of the things that I do always recognise is that entrepreneurs are really good at responding to situations. And so whereas we in local government will regularly plan, and we will plan on the basis of risk and so on, the entrepreneur's mindset is often different. It's often a mindset of, do you know what? I back myself to get through this challenge and make an opportunity out of it. Okay. So that would be my assessment of the business situation at the moment, Councillor Parker.
Okay, just one more question in relation to Brexit, and then the bigger issue, a wider issue is about COVID. Can you give us any indication as to when a deal needs to be agreed? In the sense of, the closer it gets to 31/12, one can't help but feel the worse the situation gets. Is there a time frame when, for all intents and purposes, if it gets beyond this, then there's going to be more problems?
If you follow the legal constitutional advice, then it looks like midnight on the 28th is the latest. There could, however, as we know, be workarounds that could make it even later than that, but that's certainly what I've seen.
Okay. If we move to the rest of the report provided by Michelle, anybody want to ask any questions? Gray, have we got people down to speak?
No, Chairman.
Okay. Right. Well, can I thank you, Michelle, for the report? We considered it, I think, and provided feedback at least we've raised some questions in relation to Brexit, which does seem to have dominated. So I can't think of anything more to say than beyond we've considered it, we've provided feedback. Therefore, do we agree? Does anybody dissent? If not, then we just consider and accept the report. So anybody want to indicate in the chat room disagreement? No? Then the report is agreed, and thank you. We appreciate the work that you do, and adding to it with a verbal presentation means that we're as up to date as we possibly can be. Thank you, we appreciate that. Okay, so the final item on the agenda is simply a paper with the OSMB report. Just looking forward, we are meeting again in January, another virtual meeting, which will be heavily dominated by the budget. And we've got two more meetings in February and March. So look forward to seeing you at the January meeting. Can I just end by wishing everybody a happy Christmas and a much better 2021, and thank you for all the work that you've done so far, officers, members, and everybody who's contributed. So that's my final wish, and I'll declare the meeting closed, and thank you for attending.